Optical illusions have fascinated and perplexed people for centuries, challenging our perception and understanding of the world around us. From impossible objects to shifting colors to hidden images, there are countless optical illusions that can leave us scratching our heads in amazement. So be prepared to be amazed, because I'm going to take a look at 15 of the most mind-blowing optical illusions. Number 15. The Eye Bender. This illusion is sometimes referred to as the eye bender, and it not only shows you how your eyes and brain adjust to visual input, but also how they take a while to revert to normal afterwards. This video begins with a series of colored images of eyes, and what you'll need to do is intently focus at the center and concentrate on the letters that start being displayed. You don't need to concentrate on which letters they are or try to make any words from them. Their purpose is to keep your focus on the center of the screen. As the wavy lines swirl and move, you may experience some color latency, where you're seeing color in your peripheral vision that actually isn't there. At the same time, you may feel slightly queasy as the lines keep moving, but you should keep looking directly at the center for as long as you can. Now prepare for the image to change, and now you'll be shown a full screen of text. Are you able to cleanly read it, or is there something strange happening to your perception? Most people, if they've done this properly, will see the letters moving and rippling, mainly in their peripheral vision, and this is an example of our brains counteracting motion to try to make sense of what's being looked at. In the animation, the lines are moving in patterns that would normally be too distracting to be able to focus on the central letter, so your brain takes action to try to stabilize the peripheral image. When you're shown the image of writing, your brain is still applying this effect to the image, which in this case makes the letters begin to move. Luckily, this doesn't last for too long, and your vision should return to normal fairly quickly. Number 14. The Pinna-Brelstaff illusion. Depending on the perspective you're looking at something from, your brain interprets the image to show you the representation that makes the best sense. Add to this the fact that we're evolved in a world that's full of 3D objects, and things can get strange when you're looking at a 2D image that your brain's trying to look at in 3D. This is exactly what's happening in this image, which is known as the Pinna-Brelstaff illusion. Made up of concentric rings of parallelograms, if you keep your head still, you'll see this as a stationary image. Try moving your eyes closer to the screen and back again though, and you'll immediately start to see motion in the rings, even though you know for sure that there isn't any. This effect has baffled researchers for a long time, and it was only recently that it's finally understood. It's the result of a communication delay between specific parts of your brain that are responsible for processing visual information, and it's even been shown to happen in certain animal species too. Studies have shown that there's a 15-millisecond delay between the neurons in the brain responsible for global motion, which is the way that the lines appear to be moving, and the ones responsible for local motion, which is the true way that they're not moving at all. The orientation of the shapes in the ring further trick the brain into thinking it's looking at a 3D image, and the result is a temporary sensation of movement. Number 13. The Ames Room illusion. If you've ever wanted people to see you as being taller, then the Ames Room illusion is what you've been looking for. It makes it possible for two people of the same size to be standing in the same room, but for one to appear much larger than the other to observers looking in. It's an effect that was first designed by an ophthalmologist called Adelbert Ames in 1946 and requires the use of a specially designed room to work. Observers look into an Ames room from a carefully designated position, often through a peephole, and can see a cube-shaped room that looks no different from any other. In reality, though, everything in the room, the floor, the ceiling, the walls, and the windows are all trapezoidal. The floor, while it seems flat, is on a gradient, and the walls aren't perpendicular to it, they're slanted. This allows clever positioning of objects and people into the room to make their proportions seem wildly different from normal. It means that the true illusion happening here is the recognition of the room as being normal. Your brain interprets everything else within the confines of the room and identifies them in a way that makes the most sense. So identical twins can even seem to be much larger or smaller than each other. The size difference is caused by distance, of course. The smaller person is in reality much farther away from the larger person, which is possible because of the clever way the room has been designed. The principle of the Ames Room illusion is a trick used in several movies to give the impression of vast size differences between characters. In Lord of the Rings, for example, it's how Gandalf was made to appear to be much larger than the hobbits, and examples of similar techniques go as far back as the heyday of silent movies. Number 12. The Impossible Waterfall. We know from our experiences in the world that there are certain principles that can't be overcome, and that's why certain images of impossible shapes are so popular. You've probably seen depictions of impossible staircases or shapes, which are possible on 2D surfaces because they aren't subjected to the rules of the 3D world. But things get truly crazy when one of these can be replicated in real life. This video shows the Impossible Waterfall in action after an engineer managed to build one in his workshop. As you'll see, he pours the water into the structure by the water wheel at the base, and it flows up the ramps to the top, where it pours over the edge and makes the wheel spin. It seems completely impossible, and your brain will struggle to understand how this has been done. At a point, you'll decide that there's no way that what you're looking at could be true. And you're right. This, unfortunately, is an optical illusion that's all too commonplace in the modern world and has been done by clever video editing. The clip is actually the combination of 3 pieces of footage that together make it appear as if the basic principles like the law of gravity have stopped working. When shown alongside the other illusions, however, your brain's more likely to take it in context and believe the trickery at first, before figuring out what's actually happening. Number 11. The ambiguous garage roof. Our brains don't just show us the image that exactly replicates what our eyes are perceiving, but uses contextual analysis and previously gained knowledge to make adjustments too. This is normally very useful when going about our day-to-day lives, but the true extent of the effect becomes clear when you look at certain objects in a mirror. In this illusion called the ambiguous garage roof, there's a model car positioned underneath a roof that's made of folded cards. The actual roof looks like it's inverted downward, but in the reflection in the mirror, it appears to be angled in a completely different way. The fact we know this is a replicated image of exactly the same garage roof makes this even more strange. So how is this possible? Well, the answer becomes clear when the roof is lifted off the garage, and it's revealed that neither of the versions that we think we're actually seeing are true. It's a cleverly folded piece of card with lines that aren't evenly spaced out at all, and by rotating it and replacing it on top of the garage, it's possible to reverse the effect. So the real one now looks like a completed roof, and the reflected one looks like it's bending in on itself. Number 10. The Hering illusion. First discovered by the German scientist Ewald Hering in 1861, the Hering illusion shows how we struggle to correctly see objects when something unusual is happening in the background. The classic example, as Hering designed it, is this image with radial lines emanating from a dot in the center and 2 vertical lines crossing over them. Do you believe the vertical lines are straight, or are they curved or bowed in some way? Most people see a curve in them, when they are, of course, perfectly straight. The theory behind why this happens, however, hints at one of the cleverest things that our brains try to do. When we look at an image, what we're really doing is looking back in time, even if it's just by small fractions of a second, because it takes a short moment for light to reach our eyes and for our brains to interpret it. The radial lines are tricking our brains to think that we're moving forward, but what use is information from the past if we need to make a decision? What our brains therefore do is extrapolate the information that's coming in, predict what changes will have happened by the time we're processing it and observing it, and alter the image in a corresponding way. If the vertical lines are fixed and the radial ones imply we're moving forward, then in a few nanoseconds between us seeing the light and processing it, we will have moved forward slightly, and the straight lines would now appear curved. Number 9. The Munger circle illusion. The way that we see color is one of the most regularly investigated concepts in the field of perception, and the more illusions that you see to do with it, the clearer it becomes why. This is a version of the Munger circle illusion, and what you think you see isn't actually in the image at all. It's made up of 12 circles spaced out in the background, with a series of colored lines on top of them that alternate blue, orange, green, and purple. The question then is, what color are the circles in the background? The weird thing about this is that the circles all appear to be different colors, but they also change when you focus on them. You can't, for example, directly look at any of the circles that are green, because the moment you do, they'll change to a different hue. But in your peripheral vision, you can clearly see that some of them are, in fact, green. Of course, the real illusion here is that all of the circles are exactly the same color as each other, and the differences you see are all down to how the horizontal lines are interfering with your brain's perception of them. There's a number of other ways that this illusion can be shown with different shapes and objects, which begs the question, how true is any color that we ever see? Number 8. Stepping feet. This illusion is known as the stepping feet illusion, and it's an example of how the brain will sometimes struggle to analyze all the information that's being presented with and creates moments that aren't actually there. On a black and white striped background, the 2 feet, one blue and one red, appear to be moving across the screen in a jagged motion. The problem is, if the striped background is removed, you can see the actual movement of the feet, and they're both sliding across the screen at a constant rate. So why do we see the step motion with the background? The answer lies in the contrast of the colors of the buses with the stripes. When the red foot is mainly on white stripes, the contrast is very high, which makes it seem as if it's moving faster than its actual speed. When it's against mainly black stripes, the contrast is low, so it appears as if it's moving slower. The effect of the blue foot is happening in the opposite way, and results in it looking as if it both represents steps being taken across the floor. This is another technique that's often used in cinema, particularly in animations, where the background contrast is used to simulate far more motion that is truly taking place. Number 7. Neon color spreading. The phenomenon called neon color spreading is a type of transparency effect optical illusion that causes our brains to fill in information that's simply not there in the first place. There are various different ways in which this can be shown, and one of the most effective is a series of black lines on a white background that are crisscrossing over one another. At the center of the image, if you imagine a circle and recolor all the lines that are within its perimeter, you'll notice that something peculiar happens. Instead of just seeing the lines as different colors, it'll appear as if there's now a circle that's faintly made up of the new color too, when we know in reality the background is still completely white. The effect can be taken several steps further, such as on a grid of black lines where only small segments where each line intersects are recolored, and this will also create colored circles at each point. You can even create colored circles within empty space by manipulating the color of the lines within self-contained objects too. Quite why this happens hasn't been fully explained by researchers, but the effect is more prominent when color is added to an otherwise black and white image. It's thought possible then that there's a natural misalignment between how our eyes perceive monochrome and color, but this is yet to be proved for certain. Number 6. The girl in a field. The old saying goes that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but there are some that are so confusing that many more are written about them when they're shared online. One of the strangest ones of recent times is this image of a girl standing in a field, and you'll immediately notice that her legs seem to be unusually long and skinny. Of course, there's no problem with this at all, but what if you were to hear that you're not actually properly seeing her legs at all? Take a moment to look closer and see if you can see what's going on. With a grimace on her face, she appears to be standing on some scorched grass in the field and holds her hands nervously. Some people can see the illusion here straight away, and some reportedly have taken 10 or 20 minutes to work it out. So to help you out if you're still struggling, try focusing on the girl's hands. You'll notice that she's holding onto a piece of white plastic that, if you follow it down, is actually the top of a huge bag of popcorn that just so happens to be almost the identical color to the grass on the ground. Once you see it, it's impossible to unsee it, and it's amazing our brains make it so difficult to become aware of to begin with, especially as the pieces of popcorn are so obviously not blades of grass. Number 5. Name the animal. How good do you think you are at recognizing animals? There are a few optical illusion images that have purposely been designed to be confusing in a way that they can be seen as one object or another. But it's rare to see an actual video where a similar confusion takes place. That's why this footage, which was released in 2019, went viral at the time, and people are still at odds with what they're looking at. Someone's hand is stroking the creature, but can you actually be certain what species it is? Most people will either say they're looking at a raven or a rabbit, but you might even see something completely different like a penguin. Again, this is the result of our brains filling in the missing information, and in many ways there's not enough data present to differentiate between the two. It could easily be a raven looking up to the top right with its beak half open, or a rabbit with its nose hidden beneath its fur and its ears pointing up to the top right. The more you look at it, however, the clearer the truth becomes, as it is in fact a raven. The birds love having their heads rubbed, so it's absolutely feasible that one would stay still for long enough for this to be filmed, and a rabbit would have likely behaved very differently. Number 4. Spinning dancer illusion. This animation is one of the most famous optical illusions, but still, the more you see it, the more confusing it becomes. Known as the spinning dancer, it's a clip of a female dancer doing a pirouette, but which direction is she spinning? Clockwise or counterclockwise? People's perception is split down the middle on this, and half of those watching will give one answer while the other half will give the other. Some might even see her suddenly changing direction and back again. This illusion is caused by the lack of depth in the image. If you were at the ballet, there'd be no doubt of the direction a dancer was turning because you're seeing them in 3 dimensions, and our brains are more than capable of performing the calculations needed to understand this, even when people are moving quickly. This animation, however, is on a 2D plane, so the visual cues associated with depth are not available to us. When this happens, the brain simply does the best job it can with the information at hand. To make things even stranger, if you have a mirror at hand, put it vertically to one side of the image. You could, of course, expect the reflected image to simply be spinning in the opposite direction to the original, but this isn't necessarily the case, and most people will see both of them turning in the same way. Number 3. The Schröder Staircase. The Schröder Staircase is a famous 2-dimensional optical illusion that was first published in 1858. To begin with, you think you're looking at just a basic diagram of a flight of stairs, but if you look at it for long enough, its orientation just may change. You can even turn the image completely upside down, and it'll suddenly revert so you see the same image as you did before. As with other impossible drawings, this was the furthest this illusion could be taken for more than 150 years, but then a designer actually managed to create a 3D version of it too. In the same way, to begin with, you see a 3D staircase that's lowest at the right and highest at the left. Nothing seems too out of the ordinary until it's spun around. Somehow, you still perceive the staircase in exactly the same way as before, even though you know this shouldn't be possible. To prove there's no sleight of hand going on, and it's possible to add an object on the top step, and once it's spun around again, the object is sitting on the bottom step, almost as if the rules of physics have taken a temporary vacation. The truth is ultimately revealed, though, when the staircase is turned onto its side. It is, in fact, a completely level structure. And it's the way the steps have been printed onto it and the position of the camera that gives the illusion that there's a difference in the height of either end. Number 2. A Fata Morgana. A Fata Morgana is a very specific type of optical illusion that's seen at sea, in icy regions or in deserts, and is so bizarre that it's named in Italian after the evil sorceress Morgana Le Fay from Arthurian legend. Visible with the naked eye, it's also possible to capture on camera. You might think at first that what you're looking at has been manipulated in some way. The result of the effect is that objects you'd usually expect to see on the surface of the water, ice, or sand appear to be suspended in the air, which surely must imply some kind of witchcraft is taking place. In reality, it's far less mystical, but arguably just as magical. It happens because the way that light bends when it passes through layers of air that are different temperatures, and particularly on the ocean during calm weather, it's quite normal for there to be a layer of cooler air on the surface with warmer one up above. Any object within the cooler air will, from a distance, appear to be higher up, but that's just the start of how strange this phenomenon can be. As well as seemingly raising the height of something, a Fata Morgana can also mirror objects, invert them, and on extremely rare occasions, rotate them. You can see why in historic times people were convinced that there were strange powers at work when this was seen, and it was only in recent decades that it's actually been fully understood. Number 1. The intertwining illusion. When you first look at this image, it is quite clear what type of pattern you're looking at, isn't it? The vast majority of people see this as a series of boxes arranged in spirals, but look again, is that really what's there? If you trace your finger around one of the spirals, you'll find that instead of all being connected together, the image is made up of concentric rings, and there aren't any spirals there at all. It's extremely difficult to see them as circles even when you know they are there, and this phenomenon is called the intertwining illusion. It's used by researchers to understand the way the visual system works, and is an example of how, particularly in your peripheral vision, not every bit of information is being fully processed, and you see what your brain expects to be there as opposed to what is there. In this case, it's the tilt of the squares that causes the confusion and tricks the brain into thinking that it should be forming a spiral. Actually, what your brain is trying to do is to interpret this complex information into what it would expect to find in a 3D space, as opposed to a 2D one, which is what the image is created in. So it's probably actually trying to understand the image as a tunnel stretching out in front of you. I'll see you all next time. Watch our Obscure playlist for more top 15 videos about the more obscure subjects in our world. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best and most obscure videos.